think my dog actually peed on some of the fabric once, sort of make a roll of Duchess silk. So he was sort of banned from the workroom and we had to start again. So lesson number one, dog wardrobe etiquette.
Yeah. These are the behind the wardrobe facts that we live for.
Hello and welcome to the Art of Costume podcast. I'm Elizabeth Joy Glass.
And I am Sir Thomas Sharp's nosy neighbor, Spencer Williams. Hello,
we
Elizabeth.
would be the nosy neighbors of Crimson Peak. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? All right. We live back then and we live on the adjoining estate, but we can see the house.
Oh yeah.
Can you imagine us? We would have binoculars, Spencer. We'd be watching them.
I would be infatuated with Lucille. You would be stalking Thomas, and you and I would be like, those two siblings are really, really close, Elizabeth.
We'd be like, they're weirdly close. And who are all these women that they keep bringing in? I never see them leave. I'd be taking baked goods on the reg. This is how they're staying alive without having any money. I just keep bringing them food.
I would be very nervous to bring any baked goods to Crimson Peak. Elizabeth, happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everybody. I hope you either had a very spooky, activity-filled weekend or have something fun planned for tonight. Although it is a work night.
It's a Tuesday. But how exciting. I mean, just to sit at home and pass out candy to strangers' children. I mean, I couldn't think of a more exciting night than tonight.
I mean, I live too much in the middle of nowhere to do that. But if I did.
Same. No one comes to my house.
Yeah.
And when they do, they look very scared because my lights are off and they're like, I don't know if this is a real thing.
I don't know.
And
I
it
don't think
doesn't
they got
help
candy
that
in there.
I come out in a hoodie and I look like Smeagol from The Lord of the Rings. So
you want some candy, children?
I'm very excited. It's Halloween. Have we actually had a episode come out on Halloween? I'm not sure, but this just feels right.
It does feel right. I don't think so because this is the third season.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So because Halloween's been Sunday, Monday the past 2 years.
Oh yeah, that is how calendars work. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
But what a great spooky season we've had. I mean,
I know.
Starting off with Aggie Rogers, which bucket list moment. Interview with the vampire. I've been really obsessed with vampires ever since then.
Same. Penny Dreadful,
I can't stop talking about Penny Dreadful.
That forever.
Yeah, truly. I've actually started watching it again, Elizabeth. It's now my new comfort show, which isn't very comforting, but
yeah. I think I might watch it again too. I don't know.
It's so good. Sleepy Hollow, which I finally saw after 28 years of life. So
yeah. Still shocked you hadn't seen it before.
Yeah, it blows my mind. It's been a year. It's been the spooky season. It feels like it's been a year, but man, Elizabeth, I'm excited about this episode though.
Oh, do we have a trick or treat for you all? So this week, we not only watched a Art of Costume podcast favorite, Crimson Peak. Me and Spencer interviewed costume designer Kate Hawley.
Yes, I am so excited for y'all to hear this interview, mostly because it's been about a year and a half in the making.
I know. Literally, it took us so long to get this interview because she's a busy woman. She's not taking much time off. She's always doing something.
Very busy designing some of the best costumes to ever exist. We were actually going to do this episode last Halloween, but she was busy on a project, which still very excited about. So when it finally happened, Elizabeth and I, as soon as she had room in her schedule, Elizabeth and I recorded the interview you're about to listen to, I think in March of 2023. So you're going to be listening to two younger spring chickens.
The winter's ending. We're excited for spring.
Yeah, we're excited for summer. I mean, we're two different people, but we just we just really want to do this episode because I love Crimson Peak. You actually introduced it to me on a podcast, and now it's like a regular addition to my rotation. And you all can't imagine how hard it has been for us to sit on this interview until Halloween. So I'm actually very proud of us because we've almost blown it multiple times.
We have. There have been times where we're like, should we just release that? Yeah. But no, we stuck to our original plan. And here we are today. Spencer, for those who don't know about Crimson Peak, could you want to give a little summary?
I would love to. Crimson Peak follows Edith Cushing, an aspiring author who travels to a remote Gothic mansion in the English hills with her new husband and his sister, Thomas and Lucille. Very nice people. There she must decipher the mystery behind the ghostly visions that haunt her new home that breathes and bleeds and remembers. Beware of Crimson Peak. And that is Crimson Peak.
That is Crimson Peak. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I don't know what you're doing. Go watch it.
It's so good. It's so worth it.
It's so good. I still remember that when I had it, because I think it was on our very first spooky season.
It was, yeah.
And you were just like, what's this?
I also was deathly ill too. So I felt like I was having a fever vision the entire time. And I snapped out of it, and I still loved it without the fever vision. So.
Yes. And it is worth it because we are going to go behind the costumes. We have director Guillermo Del Toro, costume designer Kate Hawley, whose notable work is Pacific Rim, Edge Tomorrow, Suicide Squad, and the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power TV series, for which she has an Emmy nomination.
And also, she has something upcoming, Elizabeth.
She does. She has. I am very excited for this, Spencer. She will be working on Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein.
That's going to be good. That has to be good.
I'm so excited. Especially for him to be taking over like the Universal monsters. I'm like, yes, sir. Yeah. Please.
And Guillermo del Toro, we trust. I think he's really become, my favorite director in recent times. Just I've really gone on to appreciate just every work, like what is a thread line between all these films that I love? I mean, it's him. Guillermo del Toro, Kate Hawley, Louis Aceda, this trinity of amazing artisans coming together. It just always works.
Absolutely. And I like that, like, you can always tell, like, something is directed by him, but I feel like unlike a lot of other directors who it's like there's a very clear like this is my style, he like changes it up. Mm-hmm. He like always goes with like what's best for the story.
Oh yeah.
Cuz it's like Pacific Rim and Crimson Peak, like you can like they're absolutely both Guillermo del Toro movies, but you're like, nah, these look different.
They're slightly different in terms of the content. But I am so excited for y'all to listen to this interview. This is actually, the interview you're about to listen to was our first interview with Kate Hawley. But since then, I've really gotten to know Kate Hawley this past year. I interviewed her at the Costume Designers Guild when we talked about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. My very first in-person speaking conversation. So I was very nervous, but I just grew to love Kate Hawley and I felt so comfortable with her. And she is hilarious and just such a wealth of knowledge too when it comes to costume. So you're all going to fall in love with her. And then I traveled to San Diego Comic-Con to also talk with Kate Hawley about the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power once again. So we have kind of developed like this traveling clown show over the past year. So I'm excited for you all to get like a little sneak peek of what that show's been like. So we're very thankful to Kate Hawley for being on the podcast, and I'm excited for you all to listen to it.
Yes, everybody enjoy our interview with Kate Hawley.
And when it's done, make sure you stick around because then we need to talk about what's happening next week. So don't go anywhere.
Yes.
so excited to finally introduce one of our heroes, costume designer Kate Hawley. Kate, thank you so much for joining.
All right, you picked a good time to get me out of bed.
It's so funny. Me and Kate were messaging, and I was like, hey, let's do this on Sunday. And as I start doing the math, I'm like, oh, no, wait, that's actually my Saturday. But, it worked out.
It worked well for me, so sorry about that.
No, it's perfect for us, too. I'm just bad with math. Anyways. We're so excited to talk about Crimson Peak. This is one of our favorite films. Actually, Elizabeth is the one who forced me to watch it a few years ago, yes. And now I can't stop talking about it.
It's like the classic date night. I want to watch a romantic gothic movie. And the boy go, oh, really?
Yeah. He kept being like, really? You want to watch that for the podcast? And I was like, absolutely. One of my favorite movies of all time. So yes, we are going to watch it.
Yeah. And when we did that episode, I was so sick. And I still was like, Elizabeth, we have to do this episode. I don't care. I'll get out of bed.
I'm wondering where that was going.
Yeah. No, not.
What does this mean with youth today? I am so sick. Is that another word, phrase, or something?
No, I mean, I was running like 101 fever.
Yeah. Well, he was just like, gotta talk about it.
Some people would have absolutely chucked up during that. So
yeah. Well, okay. I'm so excited to get into this, but let's kind of start with the bigger picture. Crimson Peak is by far my favorite Guillermo Del Toro film. I could think, it's definitely my favorite. It's haunting, disturbing, tragically beautiful. It's a masterpiece. So you've worked with Guillermo before. So what was your collaboration like with Guillermo Del Toro?
I can say, I had a crush on him from years ago too. I was doing an opera and I was watching Pan's Labyrinth. It's my first experience of Guillermo. Me too. And I just remember sitting there watching, going, oh, what a dream it would be to work with that director. And then shit happened. And it was amazing. But we'd had some experience together. I was with him when he was concepting the early stages of The Hobbit, when he was involved in the Hobbit movies. And so we got to know each other very well. And wonderful Peter had actually introduced us, and it was actually he just brought Guillermo down this corridor. I was kept in corridors a lot at the time, but Pete in his wonderfully quiet, wonderful way, sort of tiptoed in with his bare feet, and so said, "Oh, I'm just bringing Guillermo in." And I'd never met Guillermo before, and actually I had all this working stuff on the boards that I was working on another project, and Guillermo went straight to my bookshelf, and he looked at my bookshelf and he said, we can work together. I think my bookshelf had Goya, Joel Peter Wick, and, a lot of really popular novels and photographic books on my shelf. But it was an understanding that there was a common language. And so we did, a bit of work together on The Hobbit, which was an amazing experience. And then he went on to do Pacific Rim, which was a very different sort of project. And I just got this phone call and he said, hey, do you want a bit of fun? Do you want to just come and play? And look, I think everyone who's worked with Guillermo would say when he says, come and have a play, that does mean a lot of fun. And it was like,
that means yes.
Yeah, totally means yes. And it's like, he always says little things like, it's just a period movie, or it's just about robots. And that it's never, there's a whole world that unfolds in the process of creating these things. And it is a joyous thing to work with him. I can truly say that. And, he's the most benevolent dictator in a wonderful old-fashioned way. I love the hierarchy of it, but he's a genius, and I think he's an artist himself, and I think he treats his crew like artists as well. And I think in a world that's become more and more commercial, and we jump even higher, and it's quite a machine these days, it's wonderful to be working with someone like him who values that, and they're not many. So for sensitive people like myself, it's quite lovely to have that and be in a fold of wonderful collaborators and things. So that's how we got going. And Crimson Peak, you leave a project with Guillermo and you say, I've got another project coming, and you hope that you'd be invited and that. And then he sort of said, I've got this Victorian piece research, showed me some picture start research, and he says, just a little period Gothic film. Again, understatement of the year. And and then we embarked on the process. So it was a wonderful thing, and he was very generous and thoughtful and brought me on quite early because of the way he collaborates and that. So I was surrounded by, led by Guillermo, but surrounded by Tom, who was our production designer, and Guy Davis and Oscar Ciccione. And so part of that, you to be in early on the process and have the discovery and research side of things is the absolute luxury, but it's also the most important part of the process, because you're at that point picking up things and distilling and discarding and all of that. So I find it the most invaluable part of the whole process, really. Once you're running, but this is the magic time. So I'm always deeply appreciative when I'm brought in as early as that to start the collaboration.
Right. I mean, it's a beautiful collaboration. And that kind of leads me into my next question. Crimson Peak is very vast and expansive, but the overall film is really close and intimate, I would say. So what was the collaborative process like between you and the actors, Edith, Thomas, Lucille?
Well, it's an interesting thing. And again, we were lucky, because I'd say these days there's so much going on. You're lucky to get your actors 2 days before. But our main cast, Tom, I think they'd all, Tom and Mia had been in, the wonderful Jim Jarmusch vampire. You have to forgive my age. I can't remember the name of it, but one of my favorite films. Anyway, they were in Toronto, all three of them, for the Toronto Festival. And, I start off always my process talking with Guillermo. He gives a sort of character Bible. This is how he sees characters. And then also it's my job to, deeply go into the script and sort of work out things myself and know the script as well as the actors do. But I always start for myself with a series of mood boards, and that for me are sort of links through the story and visual cues and things like that, and I pull together images for each character, and they're very varied. Some of those research images come from paintings of the period, or sculptures or art, or sometimes it's a more organic feeling about environment, temperature. So my images are very expansive, and I had a few for each of these on the board just to get conversation going, because at the beginning I work in my own isolation in response to the script, and then the next stage is Guillermo's going, well, this is how I see it shaping. And so you always come with a vision of your own, and then you're adapting it, because your job is to fulfill the director's vision. I wouldn't say come with a vision of my own, but you have responses to it. And Jessica and Tom and Mia came into the room because they were giving us some time from their schedule, and they all looked at all these images, and each of them had very different responses. And I think it's a fascinating part of this process in terms of imagery, that all of us can look at an image. If we were all looking at a famous painting, we'd all see something different in it and respond to it differently, or it would mean something to us. And I think a part of my job is to really listen to that and see what they're seeing, whether it's my director, as in Guillermo here, and I remember Jessica looking at an image, and it was a woman, and all you saw was her face, her pale face, and she said, that is Lucille.
Oh, yeah.
And Tom, I had another image of Tom, and he laughed, and he said, it was one of Caspar David Friedrich's, beautiful image of a man with his back to us in the ocean. He said, everyone finds that image for me. And it's fascinating, this thing, if they can each have, it's such an important thing to make the actors part of this process, because you're always integrating a little bit of who they are as a person and their qualities, plus what they bring to the character. But for them to put a stake in the ground going, even if it's one thing, it might be a prop or a costume prop or one element, and for them to be part of that gives you a place to start the process and go. And then it's about collaboration and working with them. And I think if you don't do that, often, if you don't have the luxury of time to do that, it often creates more problems, because suddenly they're just thrown all this stuff. So if you can allow them to be as much part of the process, and Guillermo's brilliant like that, and he'll have lots of meetings with them and his own time with them discussing characters. They'll come with ideas. I've got ideas, even the props department, so it's a massive collaboration to get there. And then you could look at the character one way, but they might find another element that completely changes the way you look at that character, or a moment, or looking through the script and the arc, what are the important beats for them, and maybe you start there, maybe that's the image of the character that you start from, and then you're working backwards. So it's a big process. That's a long answer for you.
No, perfect.
I love that. And one character it certainly worked out for is Edith, especially at the beginning. She is very established in her life. Things are going fairly well for her. And that is seen in her opening costume. She looks very put together, business, detail oriented. What were you trying to establish with these opening looks?
Okay, well, there's two things. And Guillermo always had this image of Edith as a writer. And I think those are his sort of heroic versions of women. And at this time period, and it's set in Buffalo, so it's a very different world to the old world of England. And you've got wealth in, new places. You've got your, they're called the robber barons, you've got your Carnegies and all those big families with great wealth, industrial wealth and things. And also you've got at this time period when I do my research based on the time period as well, and then I throw all that shit out. But excuse my French. Edith is sort of representative of a new modern woman as opposed to the older world of Lucille and that. This is definitely in New Zealand. The women had the vote at this point. This is the suffragette era. Machines come in and make clothing. Women take a more practical view on their working dress. They're riding bicycles. They're echoing men's suits and things like that. So, even skirt pants and all these things. The women's clothing shifts hugely at this point. And so that was a huge part of her sort of, trying to be the independent writer in a man's world and representing the modern woman of the time. So her silhouette definitely reflects that. And also there's a big part of the color palette. Color's a massive thing with Guillermo in this world. He wanted in rich sort of golds and tobacco shades and things like that. So every element of this costume reflects what Guillermo wanted to see in the world of Buffalo and with Edith.
I love that, especially because
I feel like short time to build that.
Kate's getting flashbacks right now.
Jumping to the McMichael ball, this is definitely a new kind of woman in this area, and it seems like a new chapter for her starts this night. Can you talk about this look?
Absolutely. I mean, it was. Again, I looked at lots of paintings of the period. I think I even based this maybe off a Baldini period, but Guillermo really wanted her to feel like, like the fairy tale princess at the ball coming in. He wanted her to be the center of that. So that was the initial brief and the sort of feeling of petals opening and that. And again, we still have, there's another element to this costume, the black sash on the back, and there's always this presence of mourning with her clothes, and that's everywhere in that world. So that's where that dress came from. So every dress in the show ended up having a name. And my wonderful assistant designer at the time, we were trying to get our heads around the script, and so that's why we came up with a system of names. The Nancy Drew dress, and all of these different dresses. So that's how I remember that show. It became a show about dress names.
You said you had a short time to work on this one specifically. Do you remember how long that was?
Well, I think the red dress we did for Lucille was 3 weeks, and
which is wild.
Well, it if you've got a schedule that's got a lot of other things going on, it can be. And I think this was one of those ones that, we've been so busy on the others because of where you're, the practicalities of a shooting schedule and that change all the time and more so. So sometimes you're left with very little time. And I think my dog actually peed on some of the fabric once, sort of a roll of Duchess silk. So he was sort of banned from the workroom and we had to start again. So lesson number one,
wow,
dog wardrobe etiquette.
These are the behind the wardrobe facts that we live for. So.
Yeah. Is he a beautiful man?
Yes.
Oh, man. So Sir Thomas Sharp Baronet, played by the Tom Hiddleston, who we're big fans of over here, especially Elizabeth. Very fancy, and I wish I could dress like him every day. His black fabrics look so expensive. He really knows how to put on the charm when we first meet him. So what are you trying to convey when we first meet him?
I didn't have to do anything. When you first meet Tom Hiddleston, he does that. I remember him walking into the workroom, and he was looking at, just the stuff that we'd gathered and that. And he looked at us all with his shining blue eyes, and he was young Thomas. He was this sort of, you just looked at him and went, wow, his whole energy, and that was beautiful like that. But the whole thing of the Sharp siblings was that we learn, this is no spoilers now, but we learn that they murdered parents, and Guillermo really wanted, the whole idea came from them being dressed in the wardrobe of their parents' clothes. It was almost like Flowers in the Attic sort of world.
Oh, so I didn't know that.
Yeah, represents a different era, his clothing as well as Lucille's, much more the 1880s, 1870s. But of course, being a Guillermo film, there's allowances made for period sort of thing, which doesn't always appeal to the purists in that way. But Guillermo's work's more dreamlike than that. So I tend to let go of certain aspects and use period stuff when it's always use that as a starting point, but the character takes over from that point. And he's sort of a young idealist man trying to escape the sort of world, in one way that, it's such an amazing thing with the siblings, that sort of absolute reliance on their trauma together and that, and then, trying to be, and he never quite fits in the other world. He wants to be part of this modern world as an inventor and that. So his sort of wardrobe changed along with Lucille's. He was very much a reflection of her in that way. And Guillermo wanted him to stand out in the world of Buffalo, both siblings, that in their world, their old antique sort of dream world, the cold world of Cumbria, they're much more a part of that environment, and they're wearing the clothes of their parents. And when we come into the world of Buffalo, they almost become like black shadows against the golds and things of Buffalo. So in a way, there's always talk about how obvious some of this is, but when you realize he's creating more of a melodrama, it's like Betty Davis, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, or Sunset Boulevard, there's a thing that allows you to accept the rules. I think when you understand that kind of form of Hammer horror and all of that, you know who the baddies are and all of this sort of worlds, and he wanted them to sort of just be like black ink in there. So we spent a lot of time trying to find fabrics that did that, but also suggested the age and things and of that world. So and Tom had a lot to do with that, with the fit and things like that. Again, it's working. He has these beautiful long lean proportions and that, so really it wasn't hard dressing him and working with it. You're looking at the physicality of your actor, and again, in discussion with them, you're going, well, this is your physicality, and then what's your character's physicality? So sometimes you're working with it and sometimes you're choosing to work against it. So all these things are part of that dressing, and proportion and things like that is a massive part of it. And Lovely Sands Films did all his shirts and that, and in contrast to Edith's machine world, where all the suits and that was becoming under the industrial world, all their clothes were made by hand stitched and things. So it makes a difference to the feel of something, and the way the bodice sits and things like that. So all their clothes were handmade.
Right. Wow, that's beautiful. Like, such attention to detail. But also what you're saying is... They have
the luxury of only a few characters.
Right. But what you're saying is...
43 minutes is like 3 people going mad in a horror house.
And also you're saying Tom could show up to work in a paper bag and we still would have all loved him.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. We had a few paper bags around. But...
Right. All right, Kate, everything has been leading up to this moment for me. I have been wanting to talk about this specific dress.
Guillermo's favorite. We all have different favorites. It's so funny.
Yeah. He brings this dress up a lot.
I talk about this dress to anyone who will listen. We are talking about Lucille's famous red gown. It's incredible. It's just, I love the details, the spine, the way it looks like blood on the floor, which I think you call it the blood splatter dress. What do you call this dress?
The blood, the drop of blood. I think
drop of blood.
This was going to be the black dress. Originally the rules were that she'd stay in the same dress, in the black dress that we see her in the picnic scene and do that. And then a very sheepish looking Guillermo came in because I think he realized everyone was up against it. He's very good with us. And he goes, oh, I think we need a different dress for that. And he was right. And he wanted the image of blood. It was all tied up to the ring, the mother's ring and things. So, again, the lead comes from your director, and then you take those images. And I've been looking at lots of 19th century anatomy paintings, and that there's some beautiful paintings by a Frenchman, I can't remember his name, but the backs of the gowns and that had all the muscle work in them, and that's where all the language for pleating came into this show, as well as being kind of a beautiful sort of impressionist symbolist romantic language and that, so to get the richness of color, but a lot of that came from the form of muscle and anatomy. And the spine, actually, I think I did again with this is where real research is great. I found some research for the whole ribbons of the spine. I knew I wanted a spine motif in there, and then I found an image of something that worked for that, and we took it and exaggerated, as we did with Edith's hand belt, so sometimes I take things and then sort of play with them a bit and change the scale and things like that. And, Jessica is a wonderful performer and made the most of it. I think a dress like this only works when someone can carry it off like that, the most impractical dress in the world, and put on. She, again, these actors are so wonderful, when they're part of it and they want to own it, they make it work. And the lesson to learn is if you're doing something your actor doesn't want, they won't make it work. But these guys were so much a part of the process, and so that's where it came from. And I think the collars and things, I think I bought the garnets for this. I think it was one of those things where we were slowly running out of money. Garnets, but having those drops of blood and taking some of the reference from sort of the older, Victorian, Elizabethan, each period echoes other periods. Something I found a lot in the works of paintings and fashion, actually. A lot of them, when you look at the Regency period, that's evoking the neoclassical world and that. So, you find these sort of things that sort of back up your storyline for these characters and that. So that's why she sort of comes from that world, and of course the jewels in her hair echoed all of that so that you'd catch the light and things. But really that endless pleating, and that was all hand pleated, which was fantastic. But because we had tight budgets and that, and again, this was thanks to my assistant and that at the time, and the team, again, the wonderful team that I worked with, had lots of systems of you're taking trains off and putting them onto the next dress and the next dress. And partly this was knowing your director. And, when this was all great in the ball scene where you have a ball scene, but when we were doing all the pleating for Edith and Lucille in Allerdale, Guillermo goes, oh, we're going to wet the floors and we're going to bring in a bit of rain and then red clay and that. And you're going, the pleating is coming out as it goes. So, but it's knowing your director. So we built lots of trains that we could then pin onto the next dress and that, so that we weren't building a horrendous amount of dresses. We could take elements and do that. And we did that with Lucille's passementerie that we created as well. So, there's certain element of practical stuff, but this dress came from the image of a drop of blood. And it was a very much a Guillermo moment. And then I just worked with it and developed it for him, really. So, yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, honestly.
There was a lot of train fluffing.
I would do anything.
Well. You could be a sleeve fluffer on the show or a train fluffer.
I would do anything to travel back in time to fluff this damn train. I mean, this is a top 5 costume of all time. It is.
That's so funny. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, if you ever need if you do like a Kate Hawley exhibit, hit us up so I can fluff that train. It is. I talk about this dress all the time. It's just
funny. Well, give me a call afterwards. There might be something.
Okay, great.
One element I am obsessed with when it comes to Lucille is this hat.
Yeah.
I always thought it looked like a death mask of some sort. Reminds me of Edith.
Yeah. And again, the burden of these mothers and parents on these kids. Edith takes her, almost the mother, her presence all the time in mourning imagery. But the same for Lucille and Thomas, and their mother is a very big focus in their life too. I love it when Guillermo gets into sort of matriarchy of their culture. So no, that was it, and I was actually sort of playing with I love the symbolists and all that part of the world, as does Guillermo. So it's just finding different languages that changes the way you deal with costume and the shadow. And again, it's you're counting on the audience to be part of that game in that way, and understanding that, again, these are sort of things that are sort of here. It's not a period fashion of the time, but I take the silhouette and I play within it. So absolutely the idea there. Yeah
Yeah, I love it. So after the first time I even saw it, I like had to go back and I was like, wait, what is on top of her head?
I know.
Yeah.
What the hell's on top of her head? I go, it's a head. Yeah.
It's
And
so
I know
cool.
the pain it caused making that. And yes, you're just pulling up the mother ghost and that was absolutely the brief to echo the gravestone, and the wonderful Guy Davis designed the gravestone and the silhouette of this, so that informed the costume. So, again, this is understanding how to work with your collaborators in the team. And of course, Guy Davis is a wonderful long-time collaborator of Guillermo's and that too. So we had a lot of fun. And often with Guillermo too, it's understanding, and I tend to do this in the work anyway, you're always looking at your actors and characters in silhouette against the landscape, and they're either reflecting it or they're not. These are all decisions that you make. So you're always, long shot and big scale or intimate and that. And Guillermo always asked me to reflect those things and play with them. So I work closely with him and Guy on Mother Ghost. There's a lot of corridor action and all sorts of things going on. And so, yeah. I think the thing is with all of this, and this is the joy of working with Guillermo and with a team that constantly talk to each other, because sometimes, the way things happen so fast now, you don't have time, and it's so tempting to just sit in your world going, shit, I've got to get all this shit done. And, to do that. But when you take the time to understand what other departments are doing, the set dressing department and set decoration, the props department, the special effects, the visual effects, and when you understand what every single department's doing, hair and makeup importantly, then you're all collaborating and you can have this discussion. Guillermo would always we'd sit around a table and discuss color palette for hours and remove colors from the palette that he didn't want. And, and then it was the range within. And sometimes it's about letting another element of your team take center stage. Sometimes it's more important for that element to take the foreground and for you to actually step back. And so there's that learning to give and take. It's not always, hey, it's us in the foreground. It depends on what the beat of the story is about at that moment and how important it is. But I love all these links that happen, and it makes for a richer, deeper language. And then it tends to create a language that answers and solves problems more than creating them. Then you start to get to know your world, and you're going, these are the rules of the world, and this is how I work within it. So that's a classic example, Mother Ghost, there of that. And of course, we had the wonderful Doug Jones.
Oh yeah. We're big Doug Jones fans over here.
Oh, and it's lovely seeing him as sort of panto dame. He likes a lot about in fittings and that, so it's quite extraordinary. I've never met anyone like him. And then he can be so delicate in that. So it's although the waist measurement went up significantly compared to our leading ladies, but again, it's nothing's complete until all these elements are there. I don't think Mother Ghost would be complete without the gravestone to answer to it or the performer inside it. So it's always amazes me what you learn every time I do a show, and every time I do a character, I learn lots of things. And sometimes they aren't always successful, but I do believe in, there's lots of things I look back and go, ooh, that was not a great moment, or that was a fantastic moment, but it's part of the process, and you have to fail sometimes, and hopefully you get better at making those decisions. But I always want to think that you should continue being brave. And I think it's interesting in this world that we're in now, that certain language and that becomes, but we only see it this way. Look at Shakespeare and the number of productions that you see of Hamlet or anything. There are a million ways to do something, and none of it's wrong, and some are better than others. And I think that's our job as artists and designers to do that. So
Kate, when Edith arrives at Crimson Peak, I actually find the scene to be quite hilarious because
that's a papillon dog there, don't you? Like named after the butterfly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there you go. Another little jewel for you, another little Guillermo joke. There you go.
I love it. Yeah. Edith is so colorful, so girly, so feminine, and she doesn't realize she's walking into the most dark, depressing, garbage piece of shit house you could ever go to. And it's perfect. It's so funny. Was that like your intention to kind of show
I love that it's funny? I think that's fantastic, and it also teaches me to be really careful about what the audience are reading. I will
Well,
tell
it's
you,
phenomenal. It's just like she shows up and you're like, wow, this place really sucks. And she's like, oh, I'm so excited. And you're like,
well, I'll tell you what it is, and maybe it's something, again, it's something, but it is an interesting thing about what's missed or not in Beats of Stories. But when they murder her father, Thomas has actually married her. So she's coming as a bride to Allerdale. And
right.
and it didn't seem the right moment for a big romantic white dress. And I was looking again, because her language was a sort of cornucopia of flowers, and then, you know, as you come into the winter, things change. But we handmade all these violets, because violets were a symbol of mourning for the Victorians and remembrance. So it was sort of like, this was sort of a more down-to-earth version of a bridal ensemble, really.
Wow,
you know,
I didn't see that.
The father. No, it was just interesting. It was just one of those those things. And also, I think I'd been looking at a painting, and maybe I didn't quite sort of work with that, but the flowers were definitely from that sort of remembrance and mourning. And then you see the same outfit again, sort of stripped of the flowers, which was a sort of a nice little joke about
well, really speaks to it really speaks to like the genius of you and your team, and like those details that, you know, sometimes they get lost in us because
I get a bit obsessed.
Yeah, that's why you're the best.
The bathroom.
Yes, this is honestly one of my favorite looks. I feel like I've already said that, but this is one of my favorite looks because it's this crocheted lace. It's like, oh, she doesn't know she's getting trapped here. Did fabrics and textiles play an important role for these costumes?
Huge. There was a number of things, because of course when Guillermo said, oh, we're doing a Victorian thing, and then, you know, make it real and all of that. So, you know, that was the initial brief. And actually there's very few original garments that you could get away with and put there, and there's very few braid things of the period. So we used it as a stepping point and inspiration. Of course, we had to do multiples of things as well. So there's, again, practical leads sometimes, you know, contributes to the problem solving in a more creative way. And I think also this was a show that when we did the breakdown, when you do your script breakdown, you realize there's so many. I've never done so many nightgowns and dressing gowns before in my life. And it's like, how do we do this and sort of bring the sophistication of buffalo in there? And this is actually a piano shawl. This was made up of a piano shawl. We found a vintage piano shawl.
Oh, wow.
And sort of draped the sort of, again, looking at the paintings of and engravings of Mooker and all of those symbolists and all those painters. And so it was a piano shawl that we turned into a dressing gown. You know, it was an original piece. So it was one of those places where we can utilize that. And also, I think, you know, she's a bride in her home, and then she's got to live with her sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And you're being ready for your beautiful romantic night, and, you know, you've got Face of Doom looking at you. But, you know, the wardrobe she was created from a modern woman in Buffalo, and you know, wanting to look beautiful for her husband, and she would have a beautiful wardrobe of these things. So it sort of speaks to that world a bit as well. So and again, the little doomed papillon there in the picture. And actually, I'm looking at this photo that you've got here. I don't know if the audience can see it, and I'm going, yeah, there's Doug Jones hiding behind the screen.
Yeah. No, the audience will see the pictures eventually once we edit it. But
I think when I work with it's a very painterly approach to things, and it's sort of, you know, it is very much trying to create a painting, and you have to have many brushes in your, you know, in your kit and things. And a lot of things that we had started off with, we also overdyed and reprinted over and added depth of color and that. And I think one of the challenges when you're also dealing with, this is sort of slightly going off subject, but it's one of my it's an ongoing process of frustration and excitement. But the digital process of filmmaking now, as opposed to film, does cause some, challenges for wardrobe and things like that. And the way it flattens things out or highlights every single detail. So you're reliant on, Dan Laushton, the wonderful Dan, Guillermo's DOP. We did lots of camera tests. And this is Guillermo helping everyone to do their job and be as prepared as possible, so we know what we're going to get and what's going to work as he develops a language. And I love that about working with him. You know, there's safety in it. You know, you're not going to get, this is about a process, trial and error. Does that work? No, it doesn't. And all these fabrics, Mother Ghost, everything, we put that in front of the camera constantly to test things, put it together with fabrics that the set decorators, and that we're using wonderful Shane with all his fabric upholsteries, and that the scenic artists with their walls. We'd constantly have these sort of little sort of workshops and that where these things were tested. And the great thing about Guillermo is that then that happens, it's not like, and then we've changed it all on the day. So it's giving people the time to do their work.
That's great. I like this one too, because I feel like Edith is like accepting her new life now and almost growing in to the house. Was this intentional with this piece?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And sort of taking her into the sort of the darker tones. She's either going darker or fading as her life also does here. And again, this was another painting I found with those colors. It's sort of, in some ways there's again the practical mixed with the creative, and we were sort of trying to, on our budget, work out how we can sort of shift the elements up. And we're in a world of winter now, and she's, it's sort of that wonderful sort of, she's in her late autumnal tones and that. So it's definitely working that. And again, actually the little train at the back is a period train called the Little Butterfly. The swallowtail butterfly on the back.
That's amazing.
So, well, it's just things that you find as you research, and then I dump it all, and then sometimes they just make their way back in. And actually, the Victorians, we had this wonderful lady, Lorraine, on our crew, and she's a milliner, and she makes the most exquisite flowers and things. And we'd bring in wonderful buyers would bring in all these little antiques and that. And these were little sort of plummy berry things, sort of made from antique millinery velvets that she hand dyed and leaves. So it all comes from a period research, but we created it to fit the language of the film and things. So she was always sort of Edith's world was sort of luscious and things until she started fading and that. So all of this, all the passementeria and everything was created for this.
Wow. I am not ashamed to say that Lucille Sharp is my favorite character. Yes, she makes some questionable choices. I don't care. She's amazing.
And amazing.
One of Jessica Chastain's amazing. One of my favorite looks is this dark blue look, because she is literally, to me, feels like she's just grown into the house. Like she is Crimson Peak in this moment. And I just wanted to give you a moment to talk about this look. It's so cool.
Well, that's exactly the brief from Guillermo. He wanted the walls to be cyan, and his instruction to me was, when we're in Allerdale, she and Thomas are part of the walls. And it became, I think it's the whole relationship to the house. It's like it's a metaphorical umbilical cord. They're tied to this thing. It's their fate as well, and she never leaves the house. So literally in every way, her trains became longer and longer to reflect that, in certain corridor shots. It's very funny actually, because I did all the costume drawings, and my assistant pulled me up on it, the wonderful Renee, and she goes, "But Mother, they call me Mother, you always do your costumes from the back. All these drawings are from the back, and everyone wants to know what's at the front." And I go, "Well, it's because we're always walking down long corridors, the whole thing is Lucille." And Guillermo spent a lot of time working with Tom and Guy and the team on those beautiful corridors, and they corridors, right? And the whole so that imagery became part of it. And there was a beautiful line in the script describing the exterior of the house clad in a withered vine, and it also reflects the barrenness of Lucille, not having children and all of that. So it became a metaphor for all these things. So we found another one tiny leaf that had come from some antique piece of trim that we'd found somewhere, and we used that vine language that was part of the house, that was wrapping the house, as a motif for her dress. So we spent, I think they're oak leaves, so we spent quite a while working out how to do this with a piece of cording. And then when we knew what we were doing, we got all the girls into wonderful team, and they were women. So a team of 8 spent 3 weeks making all these oak leaves and that, and then the acorns are American acorns, and Jessica loved it because it sort of felt like claws, and that was reflecting the architecture of the corridors at the time, and it was a spine down her back, and so that with the train and everything helped her sort of feel part of it. And Jessica, I think, is actually wearing 8-inch heels at this point.
Wow.
I always a lot of actors, it's all illusion as well, and sort of trying to create the height. And of course, Tom's very tall, so trying to make both siblings sort of feel equal in that way. But I loved working on this, and it was sort of because of everything it meant, really. And again, sort of, we again with that wonderful element of Guillermo wetting down floors using water. Mud. We had to utilize these things, and I think we did multiple versions of this dress to sort of answer to the moment. It's like he plays a lot with scale and illusion, and with both these female characters, Guillermo would play with again working with the props and set dressing team. Furniture was scaled up or made small, and we had to do the same with clothes. And there's a lot of playing with that, and there was some things quite subtle and you wouldn't notice, but we were part of that process and creating that illusion with Guillermo.
Right. It's just so beautiful, the decay of it. And I think the coolest thing I've ever heard a designer say is designing from the back because of the corridors. I mean, that's going to stick with me for a while, because you're right. Yeah. This is a corridor heavy film, and that's why it's so cool.
Wait till you have, your cutter going, and what's on the front? It's like,
who cares?
One of the most corridor heavy scenes, I guess, is the chase scene at the end with this fabulous nightgown. Can you talk a little bit about its role in the film?
Absolutely. Again, the lead comes from a director. He talked about the house that breathes. This house breathes, and for me, it felt really important to have fabric that responded to movement. When you understand the language of the film that he was making, it's quite melodramatic and touches on a lot of those sort of there's lots of corridors, lots of staircases. So movement was a big part of it. Then there was the big motifs of Lucille being the moth and Edith being the butterfly. So those were big motifs that affected the color palettes of what they wore, the detail and decoration. I don't like to use the word decoration, but the detail. I don't like trim. I'm notorious for not liking trim, so I don't use that word. But it was essentially, so that becomes part of the language and the color palette. And when you look at a lot of Guillermo films, he actually loves ombre and that world. And I think it's the relationship to environment again, that this house of blood and clay is seeping up through everything and through the floorboards. You can't wash away the stain of the sins and all of that. So, all of these things have to be thought about. And with this nightgown, there's scenes with the wonderful poisoning cup of tea and the chair as Edith becomes sicker and sicker with the poison. And, his brief to me was, we want to make her feel smaller and smaller. So I had to make the sleeves bigger. I think I did a whole exercise at the beginning of this film with the silhouettes of both women sort of going, well, how big is a big sleeve? And the period. Everyone goes, oh, this is gigantic sleeves. Well, the period actually had gigantic sleeves. And we, a beautiful Christine from Sands Films had an original garment from Worth. And, when you looked at those, they weren't just sort of gathered in. There were some of those sleeves, just even the top half, and what we look at as a classic leg of mutton sleeve, had 3.5 meters of fabric in it. And, so there's all of the actual, again, the reality of something can be really a creative answer to stuff. And so I wanted her to feel fragile and more transparent. So she's almost like a sort of a gossamer, cocoon kind of world and very vulnerable in that. So she sort of fades and becomes sort of, more X-ray like and things. So there's a lot of work within that, and we had to make many of these 90s.
It's almost like she's becoming a ghost, like in her own right. Like she's like transitioning into like that wraith, not to use a Lord of the Rings term, but she's like kind of transitioning.
Absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful thing about Gothic literature and filmmaking, that there's those languages that you can use and keep looking at and reinventing and things. So it was great working on that. They had to do a lot of work that 90.
And the other fabulous gown in this scene is Lucille's with that like little robe over it. Just sets it perfectly for me. What was your idea behind this one?
Well, again, it was first of all, how do we make these endless 90s and nightgowns have meaning and support the characters and what Guillermo wanted to do? But he and Jessica felt that she really needed to be free at this point. When all the cards are on the table and the discoveries are made about the relationship of the Sharp siblings and the incest and all of that, there was a sort of, she wanted to be free, and just, it's almost like years of everything came out, and she said, I just want to be flying around, and also there's a sort of still a sensuality about it and that, and so we used the finest that whole scene when she's chasing Edith and running down endless staircases in those heels. We chose
really?
Jessica's amazing.
Wow, that's crazy.
Health and safety, maybe not. And she goes, I'm wearing them and I'll make them work. And she did, and she was hats off to her. And but to make the moment work for the action, this is where it almost becomes a stunt thing. It wasn't about a 90s in cotton or linen or anything, or so. It was, we chose I think we chose almost like the finest habitat, because we wanted to be able to exaggerate every single moment and set a exaggerate all of those things. So it became about that, really. And it took her into a different place from all these constricted gowns and things that she'd be wearing. It was Lucille as we hadn't seen her before. So it was a classic example of, again, working with your actors and understanding their need for that moment, and then letting that inform the design process.
Wow. So Kate, I am a huge nerd on like the costume breakdown process. I mean, I love when things get messy, dirty, and they say beware Crimson Peak for a reason, because there is blood, there is clay, there is dirt, this is snow. Kate, take us back. This must have been an absolute nightmare, but also like the perfect nightmare to work on. I think
I've got a photo of 3 crates of shoes coming from Pompeii of silk-covered yellow boots for Edith, because we were all happy chipping along. And the yellow dress was what we called the Nancy Drew dress, because she was always snooping down corridors. And and then Guillermo said, no, I'm going to have clay and mud, and I want the ombre of clay coming up the dress. And then you go, oh my God, so don't want to compromise on the materiality and that, but we have to be clever because there's not an endless budget or time and things like that. But shoes are a big thing. Again, understanding your director. When we read the script, I think in the opening scene, in contrast this breakdown to the scene we first see Edith and Buffalo walking along the boardwalk, I think the one of the paragraphs in the script breakdown is, we see feet, boots walking along the duck boards, and so you go, okay, that's where his camera is going to be. That's where my time needs to go, into the petticoat and the boots and things. So, and I love boots. It's hard to always justify them. I've worked with producers who go, and we're not spending money on boots, and I go, well, it depends what the camera's going to land, or you say you swap out boots and maybe they're wearing gumboots underneath a period dress, and you don't know that until the camera changes and we're on, so again, it's a practical thing. But I think breakdown's just a part of Guillermo's language, and it's not breakdown. It's part of the metaphorical world that he's in, and that. So you treat breakdown in a not fanciful, but it's a more painterly way. So again, it's always in relation to the landscape. Even on Pacific Rim, I think we had construction workers and that, and they reflected the landscape, and so did kaiju workers. They all became stained with the blue blood of the kaiju and that. So everything had that. So, it's just a language that is part of, unique to him and his world. So, and it becomes a heightened thing because of it. So, and just endless blood. And when I have to say, when Guillermo says he's using rain, it's never a little bit of rain. It's always torrential. And it reminds me of a story when he just had this. What I love about him is that you can be doing something fairly kind of standard like Pacific Rim, and then you'll have a scene with nuns. He loves nuns. I love all of this nuns in every show. But he had torrential rain going, so all the hoods and things, and we had these giant hoods that the nuns wore, but they couldn't be done in linen. We had to make them out of a sort of formed plastic, because literally the water was so torrential, it acted like guttering on drains of roofs, and all this water would tip out of these poor ladies. Yeah. So again, it's this amazing balance all the time between practical and creative with him, and I think they help solve problems and lead you a certain way. So it's just a big part of his language, and I love that. I love that the world is always stained in its materiality, and that I think it makes it very organic. It's a very organic way to work, and I love that part of the process with Guillermo.
Right. Guillermo's a go big or go home type of director, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So for our final question, in the end, our favorite brother and sister couple meet their demise and they reappear as ghosts. And I feel like most people, when they look at this, they're like, oh, the CGI. But I could tell that there's a real costume underneath there.
Yeah, it was all handmade. It was all made specifically for that. Yeah.
Wow, it's beautiful. Yeah, it kind of take us back. It's just looking at the colors and the white, especially on Thomas. It's really intricate.
Yeah, and it was sort of about the clay and all of those things, sort of weeping the clay of Allerdale and that. He's a wonderful, tragic, romantic hero and that. So, and we'd spent ages testing how much is too much. Guillermo would always be part of that process, but it was really just again about the environment and him being trapped there forever in that way and his sacrifice. So it was sort of, and again, the painterly language. I think you find that in the Devil's Backbone and things. There's little motifs that are very Guillermo that come through, but we had to work again with hair and makeup, and this only works because the hair is now white instead of dark, and because of the makeup test took us to this palette. So everyone has to be part of that collaboration, absolutely. Right. Oh. And the same with Lucille. Becoming a ghost with black, and I can't. It was a long time ago. I was trying to remember, but. Again, the clothes, we tried painting things, and then in the end we had to sort of make it again. So sometimes you try and do it, we'll just paint it, but that doesn't always work, especially with, fabrics that you choose and that. So often you're having to find a new series of technical things to answer to the moment. And really, most of the time ends up being practical, and that's a great way to go. In many ways, I would say being practical rather than relying solely on visual effects is a great way to sort of, it's great for your actress and actor, but also, there's some element of being able to control in an uncontrollable world. Once you've done your work, there's a whole thing onwards. But again, Guillermo's leading all of that. So you trust that he's got his overall vision there and he knows what he wants. Sometimes all these wonderful directors, they all have their own different language and way of working. And actually, my crew say this to me: if only we had a microchip that we could just download what's in your head. And I say that about my directors and that, but you have to learn to trust them because everyone's got a different way and process, and it's not always, it's not always a direct, I want this or do that. It's a discovery in that. So you've got to trust that it's instinct, and somewhere along the line, if you test it enough, you'll get there. So you learn a lot on every project. Every project's different, and it's part of the interesting part of the process.
Well, if you do start selling Kate Hawley microchips, please put us at the top of the reservation list.
It's very dark. It's very dark. I think one of my supervisor on one of them said, Kate Hawley, I'd hate to be inside your head. That's what we're paid for. We're paid for our madness. So
maybe most people, but not Elizabeth and I. So, Kate, we would love to play a quick little game with you. Yes. Would you be willing to play?
Okay. I can't guarantee you'll like the answer, but we'll try.
The one costume to rule them all. Spencer, are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Oh, Lord, this is horrible. Now I'm like a rabbit in the headlights.
Well, I'll go first so you can have some time to think of yours.
Okay.
I'm like, even though you've had 10 years, but I already said it, but my one costume rule them all is a drop of blood dress. I mean, it goes beyond just this film. If I were to think of top 5 costumes in my history of being a costume design journalist, this is one of the top 5. So I love this dress.
Thank you.
Yeah. Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's definitely your one costume to rule them all. Like, seriously, you talk about it all the time. All the time. We'll be watching something and he's like, yeah, it's really like Lucille's dress and Crimson Peak. I get like Crimson Peak vibes from this. I'm like, okay, Spencer, we get it. It's your favorite. My one costume to rule them all, though, is Edith's final nightgown. Just because it's the house that breathes. I love that the costume reflects that. The way it works with the light, the whole environment. I just think it's just stunning and perfect.
Mm-hmm. All right, Kate.
Things in the snow. If I say this, you're gonna hate me.
You hate all of them?
No. Well, it's again, you love and hate all of them, literally, because they do different things on different days on schedules and all of that. but can I answer it as an element?
Sure.
Okay. The happy belt for me was the thing that was the starting point of everything for me. The hand belt that Edith wears, I think in the scene and all of that. So it's a piece of mourning jewelry that we took, and then we created these ivory hands that framed her waist, and the belt is made of human hair, and it's
right, yes.
So for me, it represents how I think. And that I've got a particular fondness for those little ivory hands that someone's selling on the internet, and I don't get any money off it. But anyway, but I think it's just because it represented all the Victorian language that we've been looking at with mourning and death and their approach to death, and that we always think of them as being slightly horrific. You know, the Victorians with all their dead portraiture of, you know, loved ones sort of sitting up with a post up their back, but actually. It was their way to cherish a loved one, and we didn't have camera. You know, the cameras weren't accessible like they are now, and all of that. So I think the hand belt is my favorite element.
I find it so hilarious that you thought that we thought that would be a bad answer. the hand belt made of human hair.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant answer.
Yes.
I'm probably not satisfying, so now you have to find a photo of that.
Oh, we'll find it. Yeah, we'll find it for sure. We have some time. Well, Kate, this has been brilliant. We've been looking forward to this for such a long time, and I'm so excited. This was great. And honestly, Crimson Peak is one of the greatest costume design films ever. We've been saying that for a while, and it's an honor to have you here.
Go, why didn't we fix that?
Yeah.
But I have to say, Mike, again, you know, you are, you know, we all benefit from the crew and people that we work with around us. So that's all part of it. And it was a very special alchemy. It was a very special project, and I'll always be grateful for it. It was a wonderful piece to work on. And you know, it was funny when it came out, but I love that it's found its own following and understanding. And, you know, we're all very fond of it. And dear Tom, who passed away, our production designer, it was a magical time.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it really means a lot to a lot of people, this film. And, you know, as the years go by, I think people are starting to discover it more. And, you know, this has been a real treat. Thank you so much, Kate.
Yes,
this is brilliant.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Lovely to speak to you both, and lovely to meet you properly. Really lovely.
What's up, costume nerds? This is Spencer, co-host and producer of the Art of Costume blogcast. I love the simple things in life: free parking, air conditioning, and a nice comfortable hoodie. If you feel the same way, then I'm here to let you know that if you wanted to support our show, you can head over to theartofcostume.com/podstore. There you can buy awesome blogcast merch through TeePublic, such as t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers. We even have a baby onesie for all those baby costume designers out there. To get your merch, head over to theartofcostume.com/podstore. Thank you for all your support. Elizabeth, I am so happy that we finally got to hear the interview.
I know, it's been so long. And like before we did this, I listened to it again just like to refresh my memory. And I was like, oh, that interview was everything I wanted it to be.
It was perfect. It was everything. Just Kate Hawley is the best. She is hilarious. She could be a stand-up comedian. She's so funny.
She's so funny.
And just all the insight she gave us into all the costumes. I love talking about the breakdown of them. You know, I was excited to talk about the drop of blood dress.
Yeah.
That blue dress that feels like it's growing into the house. It's just...
I finally got my suspicions about the hat confirmed.
Yes, finally. I was so glad for that moment. I felt like, you know, we finally revealed the mystery ink villain in Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
We pulled the mask off. So it was just such a great interview. And I'm sure everyone at home is just jumping up and down, probably re-listening to it, which I recommend.
Yes.
If you got to give it another listen, once, twice, 3 times.
Go
we
for
support
it.
that. Yeah.
Yes, we absolutely do. And tell us what your one costume to rule them all is, or your one element, your one piece to rule them all, as Kate Hawley chose. And
She's the boss. I was like, pick whatever you want, Kate.
this is your movie. You can.
Yeah, I mean, this is your podcast for all I care.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want.
Whatever Kate Hawley wants from us is what she gets. But let us know your choice and leave us a little voicemail at 626-515-1826.
Yeah, I know that you all have tons of thoughts and feelings about Crimson Peak, so just drop them all in. We know you have it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to just be your one costume to rule them all choice. Just tell us whatever you feel about Crimson Peak.
Yeah. With that, Elizabeth, that is the end of our official spooky season.
Yes.
It's the time of the year that we look forward to every year, and I can't believe it's over already.
I know. I'm a little sad, but we are going into next month with some spooky vibes. Spencer, what are we watching next week?
Yeah, we can't really quit the spooky too much. So we're kind of doing like a soft spooky that help us transition back into regular life, I would say. And we're sticking with spooky, scary homes. Maybe that's our theme.
Yeah.
So next week, we are watching Disney's The Haunted Mansion, the new film, which you could currently watch on Disney Plus.
Yes.
I'm so excited. I love this movie.
Me too. I was shocked. I didn't think I was going to like it this much.
Me too. I'm just a big Haunted Mansion nerd, and it was a kids movie, but it was good. Like, what's wrong with it being a little bit of a kids movie? I mean, it's in a theme park, so what did you all expect? Plus, it's in New Orleans, which you and I both love. I just love New Orleans. We went on a trip. I know I've brought up on a podcast multiple times.
We might go on another trip.
Honestly, just to get back into our spooky New Orleans vibes. And I'm very excited that we'll be joined by a special guest. I'm very excited about this because we've never done something like this before. Yes. We are having our first costume concept artist as a guest. We're talking about Jen Hancock, who was one of the artists on Disney's The Haunted Mansion. So she will be sharing with us her process, her work, and what it means to be a costume concept artist, especially on The Haunted Mansion. What a crazy, crazy job. Until then, thank you all for listening. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at The Art of Costume Pod, TikTok at The Art of Costume. Don't forget to head to our merch store at theartofcostume.com/podstore. Get yourself a spooky little hoodie because it is getting cold out finally now that October is becoming November. And as always, don't forget to leave us a 5-star text review on Apple Podcasts or rate us on Spotify. It really does help. Elizabeth, happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, Spencer. And to all of you, have a spooky night.
And beware of Crimson Peak. Whatever you do, do not enter the house. No. I don't know how many times we got to say it.
No, don't trust random English baronets that come interested your way. Don't trust them.
Especially two siblings that seem to really be into each other.
Yeah.
Just look for the signs.
Just be careful, everybody. Be careful.
Happy Halloween.
The Art of Costume blogcast is hosted and produced by Elizabeth Joy Glass and Spencer Williams. Our audio engineering and editing is done by Dan White. Follow us on Instagram at The Art of Costume Pod or visit theartofcostumeblogcast.com for all blogcast updates. If you want to support the show, go to theartofcostume.com/podstore. For more costume reviews, deep dives, and interviews, head over to theartofcostume.com, a blog dedicated to highlighting the best in costume design.
We not only watched a Art of Costume podcast favorite, Crimson Peak.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Spencer interviewed costume designer Kate Hawley.
You said my name wrong.
What did I say?
You called me like Spender or something.
Did I?
Yeah. You want to give that another go?
Sure. Sorry.